WVEC-TV, Hampton.
This is Chesapeake Bay, ABC News.
It goes down as one of the deadliest campaigns of World War II, yet it remains one of the least told tales. And it happened right here off the coast of Virginia. In early 1942, German U-boat wolf packs began hunting off the United States East Coast, targeting merchant ships and their U.S. naval escorts. In this documentary from 1995, anchor Terry Zahn reports on this often overlooked part of World War II, speaking with veterans and others who lived through the attacks on both sides of the Atlantic and how close the eastern seaboard came to a German offensive.
Regularly scheduled programming will not be seen, so that we may bring you the following special presentation from WVEC-TV.
We felt like, well, they weren't going to do anything to Hampton Roads. We were too protected.
I had order to drop mines in Chesapeake Bay. You knew every time that you left port and joined a convoy that there was a U-boat out looking for you somewhere.
I sank some ships at daytime, and I was underwater with my periscope.
The submarine surfaced just to the right of us and drifted back on that starboard side and opened fire on us.
The war that we had heard of, the war that we knew about, the war that so many classmates had been called up for the draft and all, was now on our front doorstep, and it wasn't a very good feeling.
I've seen grouper on the outside, and then when divers come down, you know, they know, they're smart. Out of there. Yeah, they're out of there. It's hard to, yeah. You guys have some good videos.
We're in the boilers, and it's on the offshore side. The bow is directly that way. This thing is big. This is a very large wreck. It's over 400 feet long, about 75 feet wide. So I guess everybody should have enough service time, so let's go check it out.
For 400 years, mariners have cursed the waters off Virginia and North Carolina. On the bottom, the rusting victims of a treacherous chunk of ocean sailors dubbed the graveyard of the Atlantic. But it wasn't a storm or shoal waters that sank the W.E. Hutton in March of 1942. It was a man-made danger. German U-boats had found a fertile hunting ground. American ships and sailors had already faced the U-boat menace in the North Atlantic. Convoys were the lifeblood of England, and before and during the war, they sailed from Norfolk or New York running a gauntlet of U-boats to deliver desperately needed supplies.
You knew every time that you left port and joined a convoy that there was a U-boat out looking for you somewhere.
There weren't enough escorts, so the convoys sailed nearly unprotected, like lambs through a field of wolves.
You carried a pistol, you had a tin hat on like you had required by regulations, and if you did get hit, what would you do?
The nights were the worst. U-boats were night hunters.
I had the mid-watch for a year in the North Atlantic. The mid-watch is from midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning. And I always used to say to myself, if we're going to get hit, it's going to be on midnight to 4 in the morning. You never knew. You might have heard something, or you might have seen a flash once in a while, but you never knew until dawn came which ones were hit.
It was too dangerous to stop for survivors, so the convoy sailed on into another day and another terrifying night. Technically, before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. was neutral, but it didn't act neutral, and that outraged the Germans. American ships joined convoys. U.S. warships protected them. And under the Lend-Lease Act, in exchange for bases, the U.S. gave England 50 World War I destroyers. One was the USS Buchanan. Ray Long was a cook on board the day it was turned over to the British in Halifax.
We had frankfurters and sauerkraut, I'll never forget it. And those English sailors were eating on 23 cents a day. And we were at that time about 47 cents. And they ate me out of house and home.
2 years later, under a different name, the Buchanan would have her moment of glory fighting U-boats. Ironically, in a matter of months, the U.S. would desperately need ships like those old destroyers. The East Coast would face a grave danger sailing from another coast far away. Only weeks after the fall of France, the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, began enormous construction projects on the Brittany coast in Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and La Rochelle. Charles Deschamps was an electrician.
We were working 8 hours, and another gang came around after for 8 hours, and another gang for 8 hours, 3 times 8, 24 hours a day. We were working on the base.
They were building these gigantic U-boat pens with reinforced concrete roofs 23 feet thick. They were virtually invulnerable to attack.
We had some 1-ton bomb that they just made a little hole on the top, that's all. Huh?
Local hotels were taken over to house the submarine crews, and the U-boats sailed, wreaked havoc in the Atlantic, and returned flying victory pennants to a hero's welcome.
On both sides of the periscope there were lines and as many flags as the number of ships they sunk. Our ships, the submarines were full of rust, you see, very, very bad. The crew was in very bad shape, you see, bird and white.
The U-boats were repaired, the crews rested, and they sailed again. The Allies bombed the sub-bases repeatedly. The city of Saint-Nazaire was virtually flattened, but the sub-pens survived, so the Allies tried another approach.
And on the 28th of March 1942, a British commandos come to Saint-Nazaire.
From this house, 15-year-old Alain Bizard watched in astonishment as 600 commandos charged down these streets.
15 Schnellboats, which landed commandos, and they were willing to destroy all the gates of the harbor of Saint-Nazaire to enable the Germans to use the harbor for their submarines.
But there was another target. The Allies feared the Germans might bring the battleship Tirpitz to this dry dock.
There was a destroyer called Campbelltown, arrived at 1:30 in the night and rammed these gates, which was the biggest dry dock of the Atlantic coast.
The Campbelltown was a U.S. Lend-Lease destroyer named the Buchanan. The ship Ray Long had sailed to Halifax. The next morning, the booby-trapped ship blew up, temporarily shutting down the dry dock. Admiral Karl Dönitz ran Germany's U-boat war from his headquarters at Lorient. Surprisingly, when America entered the war, he had fewer than 100 operational subs. But they were commanded by Germany's best and brightest, one 28-year-old Kapitänleutnant Reinhard Hartigan.
On December 19, 1941, Hartigan and 2 other U-boat skippers were ordered to a meeting with Admiral Dönitz. The chateau he used as his headquarters is still here today. It wasn't normal for U-boat skippers to get their sailing orders directly from Dönitz. But these weren't normal sailing orders.
Dönitz was infuriated by America's claim of neutrality. He and his staff had developed a plan called Paukenschlag, or drumbeat, to bring the war to America. Dönitz asked Hitler for 12 long-range Type 9 subs. Hitler approved 6, but only 5 were able to sail. The U-boat commanders didn't learn their destination during the meeting. That was contained in sealed orders to be opened once at sea. But Hartigan thought he knew where he was going.
I had a big boat, Type 9B, and I knew that I was able to go to the United States.
Hartigan returned to his U-boat in Bay 6B and prepared to sail.
These submarine pens here in Lorient are still in use by the French Navy. But on December 23, 1941, Reinhard Hartigan sailed U-123 from one of these pens and headed west. Operation Paukenschlag was about to begin, and very soon the drumbeat would be heard clearly in North Carolina and Virginia.
Once out to sea, Hartigan opened his orders, and they confirmed it. He was taking the war to the east coast of the United States.
I thought it would be a big surprise for the Americans.
But Hartigan never suspected how total that surprise would be.
It was astonishing. He was...
By 1942, the U-boat was the queen of the German Navy, and it began mass producing them, 1,100 by the end of the war. U-boat crews became national heroes. The most successful were invited to Berlin. Commanders like Reinhard Hartigan were decorated by Hitler himself. More than 50 men lived in the cramped steel tube of this Type 9 boat for 3 months at a time. Many shared bunks. Food was stored everywhere, hung from pipes in boxes on the deck.
Life in a U-boat was anything but comfortable. Not only was it claustrophobic, it could also be very cold. These boats were not heated, so in the North Atlantic, the temperature inside might only be a couple of degrees warmer than the water temperature outside. The U-boats could only make a couple of gallons of fresh water every day. There wasn't enough to bathe, there wasn't even enough to shave, so for 3 months at sea, the crew did neither. After the first couple of weeks at sea, the smell in a U-boat could get pretty intense.
Type 7 U-boats were even smaller. The last one is now a museum. It's similar to the sub commanded by Helmut Rathke. Hans Sturhan was a U-boat navigator.
We enter the stern room of submarine 995.
For them, it's like going back in time.
That's the electrical part here for electrical machine.
These were the electric motors that were used underwater then?
Yeah. Underwater, yes. Now we enter the diesel room. This diesel is used on trip over the water.
These make a lot of noise?
It makes, and somebody has some in the ears for, but you have to hear the going of the machine. It's better you have clear ears.
Oh, this is the galley.
That's the kitchen.
With 3 hot plates and 2 small ovens, the cook prepared 3 meals per day for 50 men.
That's the living room of petty officers.
And when one man got out of the bunk, another man would get in?
Yeah. He changed.
The control room is in the center of the sub under the conning tower.
And it's a depth meter, this engine turning, and this is for the radar.
Just forward is the tiny captain's cabin. Across from it, the radio and sonar rooms, and then compartments for officers and chief petty officers.
This is a toilet for the officers, for the chief petty officers, and for the crew.
And finally, the forward torpedo room. The electric torpedoes carried by U-boats required constant maintenance, a dirty, back-breaking job. The crewmen slept where they worked, amongst their torpedoes.
Also 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
You have 12 torpedoes? 12 torpedoes total.
Reinhard Hartigan's larger U-123 carried 15 torpedoes. They wouldn't be enough. But as he sailed west, he didn't know that in London an eccentric group of geniuses had cracked the German Enigma code. The British knew where the 5 U-boats were, where they were going, and even their numbers and commanding officers. The British passed this intelligence bonanza to the U.S. This is a portion of one of the messages. But incredibly, the American naval commander, Admiral Ernest King, ignored it.
He didn't do anything. Admiral Ernest King maybe is a best friend of mine, because the fact that I am sitting here in my house and can answer your questions.
Hartigan found almost no opposition. Few patrol boats, fewer aircraft. The U.S. was acting like there was no war. And to his astonishment, lighthouses and city lights still burned brightly.
I attacked the ships at night time. I had to find out the speed of the ship, and that was on the coast of the United States very easy. because the coast was in full light.
In America, the war was only a month old. There just wasn't much to fight with. So the U.S. released brave, reassuring publicity pictures to boost public morale.
But as far as equipment, training, ships on station, men and material, we just didn't have it on the East Coast at that time.
In 1942, Ray Shield Jr. was a young Coast Guard ensign. He'd already been sunk on the cutter Alexander Hamilton when he was sent to Norfolk.
The district commander called me in to tell me that he was putting me in command of the 83-484. And I didn't know what the 83-484 was, see.
It turned out to be an 83-foot harbor patrol boat. And soon afterward, he and 2 other ensigns reported to a commodore who needed 3 destroyers.
And he asked what ships we were on, and I stepped forward and told him. He said, "We'll never win this war." We were doing convoy work. We were doing everything the destroyers should have been doing because they didn't have the destroyers.
Operation Paukenschlag was set to begin January 13th. But the night before, Hartigan stumbled across the steamer Cyclops and sank it. The next day, all hell broke loose along the East Coast. Hartigan sailed down the coast sinking ships as he went. The Noress, the Coimbra, an unidentified ship off the eastern shore. Contrary to popular belief, most U-boat attacks were on the surface and at night. Submerged, the U-boats had a big disadvantage.
I tried to be in front of the ship because underwater my speed was slower than the speed of the freighter.
Hartigan also sank ships with his deck guns. He'd literally sneak up behind them.
Because I was quite sure that all merchant freighters had to look out in front for submarines and all of that. Look in front, but now the merchant ships look behind.
On January 18th, Hartigan sailed past the huge military bases in Hampton Roads on the surface in broad daylight. The next night off Virginia Beach in the Outer Banks, he sank 3 more ships. The Silt Vera had just left Norfolk. The city of Atlanta went down with no survivors. A U-boat attack was a cruel way to die. Men were crushed or drowned or burned alive in pools of blazing oil. Others died in the frigid water or perished slowly of thirst or starvation in drifting lifeboats.
There were times that I thought I was dead when I was under the water. After getting off the ship, trying to stay under the water and swim as far as I could and come up and splash out of the gasoline and go back again for looking for a clear spot in the ocean. The most horrible part of it was all that night and the next morning, we could hear shipmates yelling for us. We'd head in their direction of the voice and could never find them.
Hartigan sank ships until he ran out of torpedoes. Then he headed for home, sinking 2 more on the way with gunfire. That made 9 in all. He had been challenged only once. Together, the 5 U-boats in Operation Drumbeat had sunk 25 ships in 26 days. And for America, the worst was yet to come. Wave after wave of U-boats now came to the U.S. Reinhard Hartigan returned in March, sinking 10 more ships. By the summer of '42, oil and debris on Virginia Beach had become common. But still the people of the area felt secure. City lights burned brightly at night.
We felt like, well, they weren't going to do anything to Hampton Roads. We were too protected.
The Army had even installed coastal artillery at Cape Henry to guard the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. On June 15th, thousands of beachgoers were convinced the war was far away. They'd soon learn it wasn't.
That day was a beautiful sunny day, a very warm June day.
And I was sitting on the porch of the Albemarle Hall, which was a lovely old hotel next to where the museum is. And they had rocking chairs all across, and we were sitting there talking.
I worked along with a lot of friends, Al Craft and Ann Henry, worked at a drugstore called George, the 25th and Atlantic Avenue.
And as the lunch crowd thinned out at the drugstore and getting ready for the evening time, I was near the front of the drugstore cleaning off the counter when all of a sudden there was a big boom.
And we saw flames and smoke, one right after the other.
We could see the ship clearly. It wasn't that far out, really. We could see the ship burning.
The Robert C. Tuttle was part of a 13-ship convoy. The other ships began zigzagging to avoid what they thought were torpedoes. It was exactly the wrong thing to do. Moments later, the S.O. Augusta blew up, then the Kingston Selenite.
Planes came in, depth charges were dropped, ships were running back and forth like little ants from the ant hill that had been disturbed.
The destroyer Bainbridge dropped 8 depth charges, but got 9 explosions, the last so powerful it damaged her. The convoy realized the danger wasn't a U-boat, but a minefield. In a sense, it was both.
I had order to drop mines in Chesapeake Bay, and I must admit I hardly knew what Chesapeake Bay was at that time.
Horst Dagan had done the impossible. 2 nights earlier, he had threaded U-701 through American minefields, avoided patrol boats, and mined the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. He drew this map.
I decided to go into that long run up to Cape Henry and Cape Charles. And when we had the right depth of water, about 15 yards, I let them go.
60 hours later, a timer armed the mines. By then, Dagan was far away. The Navy located most of the mines. 2 days later, the Santori found the last one. It sent her to the bottom. In Virginia Beach, the reality of war set in.
I think the main feeling was that they were going to attack the hotels on the oceanfront. That's where we felt like we were vulnerable, that they could rake the front and kill people.
We heard rumors after that they may be putting spies ashore, and the Coast Guard got a little more active with the beach patrols.
The war that we had heard of, the war that we knew about, the war that so many classmates had been called up for the draft and all, was now on our front doorstep, and it wasn't a very good feeling.
Several days later, off Cape Hatteras, Dagan learned from Admiral Dönitz just how successful he had been.
And he gave me a wireless telegram and said, "Congratulations to U-701. It was a big success."
Dagan now hunted other prey. He sank a small cutter with gunfire and torpedoed the 15,000-ton tanker William Rockefeller.
The Rockefeller was hit in the machine room at rear and sank over the stern, going down with a big hiss.
But Dagan's luck ran out on July 7th. A lookout didn't see the Army bomber in time. U-701 crash-dived, but it was too late.
We were hit by 2 air bombs by some American bomber whose commander was Harry Kane.
33 men made it off the sub in 2 groups, but neither knew about the other. The bomber flew over, dropping life belts, which the Germans formed into a crude raft.
It was encouraging for us.
But the Gulf Stream was pushing his group north at 2 to 3 knots. When rescuers finally arrived, they were no longer there.
Only the men who didn't know to swim at all, they swallowed too much water. They coughed life out of them. And then came the night. We were calmed down. The weather was good. The water was very warm. We must hold out. We must hold on to the raft. The sun went up. It got a terrible heat again. In this heat, some of the swimmers couldn't stand that. They lost consciousness and let go on the life belt, so they drowned. That was the second day then. Then came the second night. We were only, I imagine, maybe 12 men. The water grew colder and we had to make movement to get the body a little warmed up. And next morning, still more from our sailors
were drowned. In the afternoon, I had lost my conscience. One moment I awoke, somebody called my name, and in that rubber boat sat 4 men of my crew. And the blimp stood above them still, and when we came in the plane, there already were 3 other men, surprisingly.
Of the 33 men who escaped from the U-boat, only 7 had survived. They were taken to the Norfolk Navy base.
They took us in the hospital and everybody got his bunk to rest.
A few days later, Lieutenant Harry Kane and his crew flew to Norfolk to meet the man whose sub they had sunk. As Kane entered his room, Horst Dagan stood up, saluted, and said,
"Good hit. Congratulations," something like that. I really thought, this is an American soldier. He's done his duty. I had done my duty. And now we could shake hands and congratulate each other.
It was a remarkable meeting, but it wouldn't be their last, and the next would be even more remarkable. In 1989, somewhere off Cape Hatteras, diver U.V. Lovis found the U-701 after 3 years of searching. It lies, half covered in sand, guarded by a school of amberjack. Its deck gun still intact, the hatch on the conning tower still open. Horst Dagan asked Lovis not to reveal the sub's location so it might remain a memorial to his men who died. Lovis honored that request, and today the U-701 is at rest, untouched in the warm waters of the Gulf Stream. A silent reminder of a time when the war came to America. In early 1942, not much went right for the U.S. Off Cape Hatteras, the Navy created a protected anchorage surrounded by mines in which merchant ships could safely spend the night. The job given to Ray Shield Jr. and his 2 fellow ensigns by the Commodore was to guide ships in and out.
F.W. Abrams was the first one that we carried in.
It was June 11th during a fierce storm. The Abrams was making a wrong turn and Ray Shield raced up to his bridge.
I sent him a blinker message to come to us immediately, but it was too late. He hit the mine in there.
Thinking it was a torpedo, the Abrams continued and hit 2 more mines. It sank in 90 feet of water. A month earlier, Shields was sent to investigate objects floating offshore.
And there were 2 bodies over there that had been in the Gulf Stream for a long time. I could smell them before I could ever see them. They were from the Bedfordshire, an English corvette that was sent over here to help us fight submarines off of Hatteras.
They had been sunk by the U-558 and were buried on Ocracoke Island. The tiny plot is still cared for by the Coast Guard. But the U.S. was learning to fight back. By mid-1942, the number of sinkings was dropping, and U-boats began paying a price. In April, the destroyer Roper had sunk the U-85 northeast of Oregon Inlet. More than 24 bodies were recovered and quietly buried at night.
The bodies arrived about dusk. It was given a full military funeral. I had a 21-gun salute, load taps, and we lowered the 29 bodies in the grave.
A month later, off Morehead City, North Carolina, the Coast Guard cutter Icarus depth-charged the U-352. But as it sank, the Icarus gunners kept firing at the Germans struggling in the water.
About 10 or 12, I cannot say exact the figure, the number, died. Icarus came near to us and we heard a voice of a man, "Damn Germans, go to hell." Icarus disappeared. After about 50 minutes, she returned, picked all men up.
The survivors were brought to Charleston. There they got clean clothes and a first American meal, fried chicken and ice cream. Then Helmut Rathke marched his men off to a series of POW camps.
That's an honor for me to be the first prisoner of war as officer in the United States.
There were other attempts to mine the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. U-566 in the summer of 1943.
I was on board navigator, that's correct, navigator. And we had to drop mines from the coast, I would say 2 or 3 miles, not more.
But the Navy quickly found the mines, and not long afterwards, U-566 was sunk off Portugal.
We were bombed by a British airplane, and the bombs were just underneath the propellers.
The crew was rescued by a Spanish fishing boat. This is Hans Sturhan coming aboard. And the U.S. began coastal convoys. Overhead, a simple solution that worked.
The blimp is an excellent platform for electronic equipment and also can carry a sizable amount of weapons and weight compared to a fixed-wing aircraft.
John Fahey was barely out of his teens when he flew the long, lonely patrols.
We dropped a lot of bombs, and I probably killed a lot of fish, I would think, and hopefully damaged a few submarines. And we were told, and I really believe firmly, that we were playing a major part in the war by keeping the submarines submerged.
But the Navy also developed new types of ships, destroyer escorts designed especially to kill subs, and small escort carriers. These, each with 4 or 5 destroyer escorts, formed deadly hunter-killer groups. On May 15, 1944, the carrier Guadalcanal left Norfolk for a battle that showed just how far the tide had turned against U-boats. The group was looking for its 5th sub-kill, but hoping for something else.
If we get another submarine that comes up and it stays up another 10 minutes, we're going to capture it.
Luke Lukosius volunteered for the boarding party, a decision that eventually made him a hero, and made the U-505 one of the biggest attractions at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. On June 4th, the group depth-charged a U-boat and forced it to the surface off the coast of Africa. Gunners fired at the sub not to sink it, but to force the crew to abandon it.
And when our skipper saw that they were jumping off, he said, "The boarding party away."
Luke was in the first boat to reach the sub. He and his buddies climbed aboard and entered the strange, deserted U-boat, which was already filling with water.
We all came down from the conning tower, down the ladder. Jacobson went to the engines. Wodowiak and Nispo went to the captain's quarters. Oh, this is the sea strainer. Right here. I was coming to the engine room, and when I come in here, there was water coming in here. What I was worried about was there could have been a booby trap under the cover. And as you pick it up, but then, you know, we were kids, we didn't think much. But anyhow, see what I did? And the water that was coming in, the water stopped coming in.
The Germans were rescued. Only one had been killed. Luke and his buddies were brought back to the Pillsbury.
That's when we start, gee whiz, that damn thing could have sunk. You know, then we start thinking, and you know what? They give us a couple of shots of brandy, you know, to settle us down. So we're giddy now. We're 2 ounces of booze, you know.
The U-505 was towed to Bermuda. Luke wouldn't see it again for 10 years, until it was brought to the museum in Chicago, his hometown.
Which one do you think? I think this is me here with the white hat.
Is that right?
Yeah.
He donated his Silver Star to the museum, the medal which made him a secret hero.
They presented us these here medals, awards, the nature which cannot be revealed at this time. Top secret.
But for Luke, it's not so much what the sub means to him, but what it will mean to his children and his grandchildren.
I took my grandchildren up to the top of the conning tower, and so they were really thrilled. So was I. Eventually, when I'm gone, the kids will they'll really appreciate it. Say, Grandpa did that, you know. Yeah.
Ein bisschen mehr Friede.
November 13th is Germany's Memorial Day, but this isn't Germany. It's Hampton. Amidst the Americans here in the National Cemetery, 26 Germans from the U-85 sunk in April 1942, buried at night by Clifford Robbins. Past enemies, resting in the same soil, sheltered by the same trees, and today remembered by the same people, including these American submarine veterans of World War II.
So here we atone for each other, here we become friends with each other. We realize that the men on both sides of the fence did what they thought was their duty.
Our Father, who art in heaven,
Vater unser im Himmel,
hallowed be thy name.
Geheiligt werde dein Name.
With the death of Hitler, Admiral Karl Dönitz took over the government. He lived on a naval base here in Flensburg, in this very house, as a matter of fact. And on May 8, 1945, he surrendered Germany to the Allies. The U-boats too surrendered, although 87% had been lost. And of the 40,000 sailors who took them to sea, 30,000 never came home.
Germany built a memorial to her U-boat sailors in Moltenort. Here the names of the men lost on more than 750 U-boats, on the U-85, on Helmut Röttge's U-352, and on Horst Dagen's U-701. Just on the coast at Ubot, next to the U-995, a memorial to all sailors lost at sea. Ironically, at its base, a plaque in honor of the American submariners lost in World War II. Over the past half-century, the wounds of war have healed, both Germans and Americans making some sort of personal sense out of the hatred and the killing. Reinhard Hartigan became a successful marine fuel dealer in Bremen. He sank or damaged 29 Allied ships and still has his chart from the U-123.
Here was a Nornis, and there was a Coimbra.
Operation Drumbeat by Michael Gannon was published in 1990. It reads like Hartigan's biography. But at a book signing in Jacksonville, Florida, he came face to face with his past. Two women had waited in line to meet him.
Because their father was a captain of the city of Atlanta. I sank, and it was a total loss. And it was very difficult for me. What shall I write in the book to the daughter of a captain? I sank, and he was dead. And then I stand up and gave them the book. And the one lady embraced me and said to me, "Don't think that I am angry to you. I know you sunk the ship and you didn't kill our father. And that is a very big difference. I know this."
Hans Storhahn rejoined the new German Navy after the war. He rose to the rank of captain before retiring. He's still at home in a submarine.
Must be done quickly.
Alain Bizarre, who as a 15-year-old boy watched the British commando raid on Saint-Nazaire, joined the French commandos. He fought at Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, served in Africa and all over the world. In 1962, he attended the Armed Forces Staff College in Norfolk and eventually retired as a general in command of the elite French Special Forces. John Fahey got out of blimps, went into naval intelligence, and wound up an associate professor of Russian language at Old Dominion University. Helmut Röttge settled in Flensburg, where he became a successful builder. He lives almost within sight of the shipyard which built his U-352. Horst Dagen lives in Lüneburg with his wife Lotte, who he married when he arrived home in Germany.
I loved her from the first moment. And we married within 6 weeks.
During his years in the POW camp, he learned English, a little guitar, and a taste for American music. One day in 1982, his phone rang off the hook, friends telling him his name was in a newspaper ad. It was a bombshell.
Harry Kane seeking Horst Dagen. Who knows where he is?
The pilot who sank Dagen's sub 40 years earlier and visited him in the hospital was coming to Germany.
I told him that it's too expensive to go by plane here over the ocean and see me. That doesn't pay. Oh, I'll come there, I'll shake hands with you. And so we did. He had married, I had married, and he had a son in New York, Harry Kane Jr.
They kept in touch until Harry Kane died in North Carolina in 1990. But even today, Horst Dagen carries with him a reminder of the resilience of the human heart and the triumph of friendship over the horrors of war.
We were friends and we were enemies, but all this has been forgotten now.
And then there's the story of Kurt Kruger of Bad Oeynhausen, a proud, tough-as-nails radioman on the U-352 sunk off North Carolina. As a POW, Kruger was interrogated but refused to say anything. The officer in charge noted Kruger was hopeless. Then in a POW camp outside Phoenix called Papago Park, he was assigned to work with an American Army dentist named Bernard Jacobson, who would change his life.
Within all the years in Papago Park, he presented me one chewing gum even.
He let Kurt have a dog and noticed he was spending his off hours learning English.
And he said, well, how about a course in English? And I said, well, if you can arrange it.
And Kurt Kruger, German POW, was enrolled in a correspondence course through the University of California. Kurt's respect for the dentist grew. He treated all his patients the same, no matter who they were.
Whether it was a high officer of the army there or whether it was a prisoner of war. He was a real man with justice in his heart.
From him, Kurt learned tolerance, and over time the two became friends. Kurt Kruger, the tough-as-nails U-boat sailor, and Dr. Bernard Jacobson, the Jewish dentist. They last spoke in September 1985. Jacobson died 6 days later, but he left Kurt with a lesson he never forgot.
I learned in the prison of warship to come along with everybody, not to look at the color, blacks or Jews. He gave me so much. Yes, he gave me so much.
This was the U-352. It was a German U-boat that was sunk by the Coast Guard cutter Icarus.
Most any weekend, you'll find boats clustered together 26 miles off Morehead City, North Carolina. 110 feet below, possibly the hottest diving attraction on the East Coast.
I found a number of wallets in there.
George Purifoy's dive shop is something of a U-boat museum. He helped find the U-352 in 1975. On his second dive,
crystal clear water, 100-foot, 150-foot visibility. The anchor caught right in the conning tower as we were going down, and you could look and see both ends of the sub like that. Awesome thing.
It's really interesting. It's really dark inside. Lots of growth, and even some of the handles still turn and still work. Yeah, it's really neat. You know what they say about that German engineering.
But George Purifoy realized that what was under these waters was also a war memorial, with great meaning on both sides of the Atlantic. So he and others organized a reunion. In May 1992, Kurt Kruger and fellow survivors of the U-352 joined crewmen from the Icarus, the ship that sank them in Morehead City. Old warriors, no longer enemies. On the 50th anniversary of their sinking, the U-boat sailors braved stormy seas to pay tribute to those who didn't survive. Kurt Kruger read their names aloud.
That was quite a moment. It was hard to think about. Wartime, dead, a lost boat, a lost home, a lost Germany. They took down a wreath with a ribbon on it. I brought this ribbon from here, and it said in the blue ribbon with gold letters, to all war victims. And I repeat that, to all war victims. No, we should not forget, but we should understand and build a new world, build a new friendship to point out that mankind belongs together.
Thank you.